adjourn and meet. Yeah. Welcome everybody to tonight's meeting. Call order. At this time, I will do the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do I hear adoption of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Been moving second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Before we're going to do a proclamation. I've asked Councilmember Fair-Tommy to read it for me because I have no voice tonight, and I thank that very much, Tracy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the proclamation is for Martin Luther King Day. Whereas the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. has inspired this country and the world with his vision and dedication to freedom and equity, and whereas Martin Luther King Jr. became the voice of the American Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s and 1960s with eloquent speeches and nonviolent action that resulted in landmark legislation, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and whereas Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on April 4th, 1968 at 39 years of age, and whereas the voice of Martin Luther King Jr. was not silenced and his faith and courage in proclaiming the message of liberty and justice for all lives on, and whereas federal legislation signed into law on November 2nd, 1983, established a legal holiday to be celebrated on the third Monday in January, honoring the life of civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr., who was born on January 15th, 1929. Now, therefore, the mayor and the city council of the city of Lake Forest Park do hereby proclaim Monday, January 16th, 2023 as Martin Luther King Jr. Day in the city of Lake Forest Park. And I urge all citizens to join me in this special observance. Signed this 12th day of January, 2023, Jeff Johnson, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Before we move on, I'd like to tell the kids in the back row that we will still call on them, even though they're trying to hide from us. Sorry about that. With that, do we have any citizens' comments?
We have one person online. If you want to address the council, please use the raise hand function. Doesn't look like it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Seeing no citizens' comment, I'll close that at this time and move on to the consent calendar.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved in second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Pass unanimously. Thank you, council. Ordinance and resolution for introduction and referral. Resolution 23-1883, authorizing the mayor to sign the American Rescue Plan Act ARPA grant agreement between the city and Local 104. City Administrator Hill, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council, and Happy New Year. Attached tonight to your packet is a draft contract document for the Local 104, reflective of the Treasury's final rule. If you remember, this goes back a ways, the Local 104 applied for some variances to setbacks, which required some owner agreement letters that are on file with the planning department in order to construct additional outdoor dining in the back of the building. They have the outdoor dining out front. They, through construction delays and supply chain issues, they're still working on this, and items are slowly rolling in, but we've been talking to them now for over a year about using ARPA funds to help them complete this, because it is a qualifying cost, and we're building it solely to add additional outdoor seating. And so what we have before you tonight is a contract proposed not to exceed $100,000. This has been working with them in all of the bids that they've received. Some of those they've now paid for the work to be done, and a little bit still outstanding. But this would reimburse them for the cost of making those changes to the Local 104. As far as fiscal implications, remember in the budget, there's exactly $300,000 that was dedicated to small businesses in the 23-24 biennial budget. So this would be the first application against those funds. And as is mentioned in the agenda cover, We have about 195,000 in unspent small business assistance funds from contracts that expired in December of 22 that would roll back to the city. And that is just because there was a lot of expectation on those applicants of what costs they had, but not every cost that they had either qualified or they actually spent. And so those will be rolling back to the city as well. So this is scheduled for your January 26th meeting to consider action. And tonight I just happy to answer any questions that you might have or anything I can bring back to you that evening for consideration.
Councilmember Lebo.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Director Hill. Could you talk a little more about how this is a qualifying expenditure in the sense that we no longer have indoor dining restrictions or rules? And how is this otherwise not considered just an expansion of their business for which gifting of public resources is not a consideration?
So that it still qualifies under ARPA. The ARPA final rule still applies to these applications of dollars. So for outdoor dining, PPE is still a cost that's allowed under that as well. And so as long as they fit within the final rule, these are still qualifying costs. The reason that it doesn't fall under a gift of public funds is we kept $300,000 as ARPA dollars. We did not assume those as lost revenue. So they still have that little flag on them that those are federal dollars. And so we don't get into the issue of gifting of public funds. I can understand the concern that this is an expansion of the business, but this was something that we started and reached out to them early on during the height of the pandemic. It's just taken time to get there. And I think experience from restaurants and things, I'm more happy to dine outside still today. And so I think we're still addressing that. COVID is still obviously very prevalent in society. And so my read would be that this still meets the final rule because it is listed costs, and we did keep those dollars separate for us to be able to help small businesses.
Just to follow up, would this be the largest grant that the city has given to a small business?
To a small business, yes, it would be.
And then in terms of, do we see on the horizon other requests for grants for this, for which, how do you balance what is an appropriate amount to give to each of the businesses or nonprofits?
Yeah, at this point in time, we've had no other applications. We had some early on. We helped a few here in the town center early on. But since that, I think the largest we had there was around 50,000, I think at that time. That's the question. And that's kind of, not to punt, but you know, in the options that I included is that's the policy discussion that we need to have. Is there a right dollar amount? I think we've discussed in the past. Let's help those that we can, especially, you know, we targeted local businesses. We set our standards such that we weren't helping large corporate businesses. We want to make sure that our small businesses succeed. And I think if that means that we make a large investment in one where we have that ability, that's a benefit to the citizens.
Yes.
So just a question. So it states in here that this funds would come out of the current 300,000 that we have allocated for this budget year. When will we see the 195 unspent being rolled in, or are we going to assume that as lost revenue? What is the
But that
plan?
would have to be as well, and that's a question we've got to clear with legal, because that was put out as ARPA funds. So it can, since it was never expended, that should be still sitting there as ARPA funds. So I've got to clarify that. We're trying to work with those applicants right now. They had contracts. We've been diligently working with them to get additional accounting that we require, and it's taking some time. But we're not going to call the number until we make sure that we've satisfied any obligations under those contracts for expenses that they had when those contracts were valid. And then at the end of the day, we'll have a number. But that's the number we have today, unless somebody suddenly makes some more information available to our finance director.
And I'm assuming their language is similar to here, where their contract can be extended, their agreement can be extended.
Correct.
So we may see those if they find, but for this one, we're good with our 300,000 and it's it's self-contained and it's
Correct.
okay as written. Okay.
And to your point, we are working with Sound Generation. So our senior center, they have some ongoing costs. They wanted to extend their contract, but they reached out to us after it had expired. So best path forward is just to do a new contract. And so we're working with them because they had some additional costs under the previous contract that we're trying to get into that. But they're going to have some ongoing costs as they still have a lot of remote that they're doing with the individuals that they serve, that we want to be able to help them with these dollars.
Thank you for those clarifications.
No other questions? Okay, see none. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you.
With that, we will move on to ordinance resolution, resolution 23-1882, authorizing the mayor to sign amendment number 1 to the professional services contract agreement, AG 21-002, with Transportation Solutions Incorporated for design and construction management service for the SR 104 and 40th Place Northeast Roundabout project. And Andy, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Hi,
So
everyone.
you're raising your kid in the woods, I see.
In Jurassic Park.
Yeah, lucky kid.
He'll be out here with me soon enough. I wish I were back at this place, my happy place, but no, I'm here at home, helping our pup who just had knee surgery recover. So I've been spending a little more time working from home these past couple of weeks. Yeah, finally got around to adding a virtual background to my Zoom screen. So hope you like it. As a matter of fact, that's I don't know if you can see, that's her right there in the image behind me. Got my head obscures while I'm on screen. Okay, so yeah, I'm here to discuss the contract amendment request that was introduced at the work session in December. This is the second touch of the item. We're seeking action on it tonight if you're amenable to that, mainly because it helps the project schedule, which has faced some headwinds, and seeking to aid the consultant in keeping their work moving as much as we can. So what I've done is I've prepared some responses to feedback we received at the work session, and that I understand City Administrator Hill had received directly in between then and now. And one of those items, actually, one of those responses you should already have received, and that was the new attachment, the figure that was added per Councilmember Castlever's request at the work session to see an illustration of how the project footprint had changed from the original assumed layout based on the 2018 Safe Highway Study versus the current design. As you may recall, I had mentioned at the work session, and I wrote in the cover sheet that changes in layout had a substantial effect on the requirements, the design requirements for the project, what we need to build and what that costs to design. And so that illustration tells what I would consider like half the story of that changed layout, and what the how that sort of inspired additional design costs. I'm here to tell you sort of the other half of the story, or help explain what that graphic shows anyway. So actually what I'd like to do is share my screen. Okay. And is everyone seeing the image, the graphics that I have up on screen now?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. And I have a couple of these. I have a PDF file here that has a few pages to it. The first couple have these 2 images per slide. If anything's not large enough and you need me to zoom in, just let me know. So here on the left-hand side of the screen is the graphic, or an excerpt of it, kind of a cropped version of the graphic that was included in the cover sheet, and that shows in these colorized fashion. This is the original layout from the Safe Highways study. And then the black and white line work is the consultant, basically the consultant's current design, where we're between 60 and 90% at the moment. And so you can see here, as I described at the work session, the largest, or the areas where the expansion in the layout is most significant. If you were to break this site into quadrants, say right down the center of the roundabout here, or the center island, it's the northwest and the southwest quadrants where you have, these greatest, expansions from what was assumed. And, you may have seen this figure, or your initial reaction to this figure may have been, as mine was, when I was negotiating the amendment with the consultant, that it doesn't look at a glance like it's a, say there's a proposed about 50% increase in the fee. It doesn't look like a 50% larger layout, at least not spatially, two-dimensionally. And that's true. And I had asked them about that. And so I want to kind of run you through the explanation of how it really doesn't take much of an expansion in these areas where the project had to expand to meet the geometric requirements that these roundabouts have to have, to result in significant construction impacts and design impacts. So one thing that this figure here that I had included with the cover sheet doesn't show you is elevations. It gives you a two-dimensional, plan view, top-down view of the site. And we didn't put elevations on here sort of intentionally because, we thought the graphic had enough information on it as it was, and we didn't want it to become too cluttered. But you really do need to understand how the elevations work out here to understand why these, somewhat modest expansions in these areas of the site lead to, big design changes. So on the right-hand side of the screen is a topographic map from the city's GIS. And for anyone who doesn't spend half of, their day looking at contour maps like I do, or civil engineers do, I just wanted to kind of explain how to read this. Each of these lines that you see here represents 1 foot in elevation difference. And so if you can see my cursor here, if I'm standing right here on State Route 104 and I walk, let's say 50 feet to the east, let's say that's a distance, about how I'm moving my cursor, about 1.5 to 2 inches there. You would ascend approximately, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 feet, in that span. So that's your, that kind of shows you what's happening with the slope of the earth in this area. And the other sort of notable thing I want to review a little bit about how to read this is where you see the contours spaced farther apart, it indicates a milder slope to the ground surface. And when they're closer together, say like they are over here, that indicates a steeper slope. So same example, if I'm standing here and I walk 50 feet, I'm going to climb, let's say 5 feet in elevation over that distance. If I instead stand over here at the northwest corner of the site and I start walking northwest direction, say that same 50 feet, at a glance, it looks like I'm ascending, 10, 15 feet in that same span. So it's a significantly steeper slope in these areas where you see the contour lines bunched together. And how that impacts design. So I'm going to kind of walk you along what engineers refer to as a profile. So this blue line, let's say we're walking along this blue line here that I've drawn on this aerial photo. And forget about these arrows for the moment. I'll explain what those are in just a bit. But we start at the south end and we walk towards the north. Over here on the right-hand side of the screen is sort of a representation of what that experience is gonna be, like what the ground surface does over that distance. Okay, so it increases from south to north overall. It's a generally mild slope for the first 3/4 of that route, and then it steepens up quite a bit as you get over to this, towards the north end. So here's how that affects the design here. So this colorized little image I have here, let's say that this is the original assumed layout for the roundabout based on the Safe Highways study. What we have to do, basically this is what we're going to build, and in some cases, in some spots, it might be slightly above the existing ground surface, and some it's slightly below. At the boundary condition over here on the north-hand side, and this was what the consultant had assumed, they would be only building as far into this steep slope that you'd have maybe a few feet of elevation difference to make up, not a very significant amount. When you cut into the earth by this depth and you need to tie back into your existing slope with some kind of design feature, sometimes you can do that just with an earth embankment if you can slope it mildly enough, and you just sort of use vegetation to stabilize the surface and keep it from eroding. You might have like a very low profile retaining structure, like a rockery. As a matter of fact, this rough order of magnitude height that you're trying to make up over here might be the height of a single boulder. It doesn't require a structural engineering specialist to design that kind of grading solution when you have that kind of height to make up. So what we actually have, though, at 60% design is we've recognized we actually have a condition that looks more like this. And you can see the dimensions here. These are actually dimensions I pulled off of the plan. The first plan I showed you in this series of images. The total width of that assumed roundabout, the conceptual design roundabout from the study, was about 150 feet, and the current design is 171 feet. Not a huge expansion overall, but an additional 20 feet. So this is on your north end of your project. This is where your project is getting larger, and expanding the project footprint and keeping the surface grade flat an additional 20 feet in this direction. Now, if you're looking at the difference you now have to make up in height, like the size of the cut you're making into this slope, it's quite significant. And you cannot use the same types of solutions you would have used to tie back into this slope as you would if it were like a 3-foot embankment. For instance, I took this photo about a dozen years ago in Southeast Asia, and here's an example of that magnitude of cut into the earth that was not, they just kind of have an earth embankment that is exposed here, and this is a dangerous solution. It's not allowed here, but that's, and I hope it's kind of clear why. I mean, it wouldn't take much to destabilize this and kind of bring this slope down. So it's anyway. So the solution that we need at this north end of the site now is a retaining structure. So that's just this little block that I've drawn here, and that's an expensive feature to design, at least a wall of this height, and a wall that is going to be a lot more conspicuous than a 3-foot, let's say, retaining structure might have been. And so there's it's going to take a sort of custom design by a structural engineer to design something that is technically sound to retain this height of earth, and is also has some aesthetic appeal because it'll be a rather conspicuous feature at this end of the site. And I'm sorry, I neglected to mention, by the way, just kind of coming back to this figure on the left here, these yellow arrows show you this was the width of that original layout footprint from the study, and the white arrows on the other side kind of show you the width per the current design. So that one change, by the way, this one grading change and the structural engineering cost that it adds to the project, the geotechnical engineering cost that it adds, it's the largest single source of increase in the fee. I think it's over a third of the proposed cost that would be added to the consultant's contract. So it was, it's one example. I mean, there are several categories of additional costs. This is not the only source of additional cost, but it's the largest single one. And it's an example of how it really doesn't take a lot of change in footprint at this location to have a significant cost impact on design. So that's sort of the, the gist I wanted to share about how this works, at least how, the one very large source of the increase was generated. Hope I didn't go through that too quickly or confuse anybody further, but I thought that might be useful to share. And so actually, let me, now I'm gonna, let's see. I don't know how to get out of my little thumbnail view here. So that I can stop sharing this. Oh, here we go. All right, perfect.
Okay, we have some questions. It's Deputy Mayor French, then Councilmember Cassover, then Councilmember Riddle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Andy, I think you're giving Professor Goldman a run for his money tonight on teaching skills. Thank you for the diagrams. I really enjoyed that. Actually, it was great visuals. So very understandable. The height of the wall, the original wall was how many feet? Just roughly.
I would say that the assumption that the consultant made was that you were looking at a less than 4 foot retaining structure.
I assume something like that. And then the new one would be, I mean, again, this is ballpark. This is not engineered yet. So
it is, I want to say about 12 feet.
Okay.
At its highest.
That's a pretty big shift. And so I would assume that we'd be looking at making sure that we have, as we will on other parts of the project, some sort of decorative inlay and plantings or whatever else to kind of offset the monolithic nature of the beast.
Yes, we will. That's part of the structural engineer that's been retained, added to the team. Really, that part of their scope is to run through a design options review with us to select something that we feel would have community acceptance. And so, yeah, we're not going to let the structural engineer, sort of kind of go off and running and sort of, thing would be technically sufficient. Leave it at that.
And the good news is that a few council members definitely have opinions about walls. So I think we can get there. Thank you very much. This looks like a very appropriate way to go, and I appreciate your very prescriptive and descriptive nature of your comments here. Thank you.
Of course, thanks.
Councilmember Cassover.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much, Andy, for following through here and getting the illustration that I asked for. I really do appreciate that, but I do have a couple of additional questions. First of all, what were the assumptions that were made originally that had to change to add that additional 20 feet to the whole size of the roundabout footprint? As I look at the diagram that you've given us, it appears to me that the actual turn that, for example, a bus would need to make is steeper in the new design than it was in the old design. And so I'm a little puzzled as to what the issues were with the previous size and design of the roundabout that have necessitated this change?
Well, to be candid with you, council member, I wish I had the consultant here with me to answer a question of that sort of specificity as to like what drove the change in the layout that resulted, for instance, in expansion into the two quadrants where we see the expansion. Why wasn't there an expansion? Why couldn't the project have been shifted further to the west, for instance, to negate that impact? I know that the basic explanation that I'm familiar with is that they're following the state's design standards for these structures, and that they have to achieve several geometric, satisfy several geometric criteria in how they lay the project out, that you wouldn't be designing, I think, at that level of specificity during a planning study. Honestly, I don't know how. I think it was Petit was the consultant that helped show or helped develop these conceptual design renderings that were part of the Safe Highway study. And they may have used a software like AutoCAD to draw these to draw the roundabout in as accurately as they could, but they didn't have access to, say, land survey data that would have given them a sense of elevations at the site. They wouldn't have been able to tell what they needed to do with the layout to achieve, satisfy like stopping site distance criteria, for instance, is something, I know that I'm not a transportation engineer, but just sort of my general understanding is that visibility through turns and up and down slopes is something that really drives how the layout of these roads ultimately looks. The consultant who did the plan 4 or 5 years ago wouldn't have had all of the information that the design consultant now has. And for a more detailed explanation of what specifically they learned about the geometry of this site, horizontally and vertically, and how that drove the specific deviation, like where the layout needed to change relative to the existing or the assumed layout. It's an explanation that the design engineers would have to offer. It's something I haven't gotten that far into with them, so that I'd feel comfortable describing it for you here, and feel that I was giving you the accurate story.
Okay, well that's okay. If you don't have that information today, I'm fine with that, but it would be good to understand it a little better. I have to say that my major concern is that nothing that we do at this roundabout would impede the transit agencies from identifying Highway 104 as like not a good option for them. I mean, I don't want us to be doing something that would limit public transit from using that road, because that's only going to become more important in the future. So if there is a way for you to get an answer from the design engineers that would assure us that this is bus friendly and that the transit agencies are all sort of okay with this design, I'm okay too.
On the second point, you just mentioned about the suitability of the geometry to accommodate those larger vehicles. That I have seen. I know that they use a software called AutoTurn, where they simulate the movement of these large vehicles. It's sort of the industry standard for engineers, to model the movement of these large vehicles through roadways, roundabouts, whatever type of roadway it is that you're building. That I know that they've done, and are designing to accommodate. I mean, they're very aware that this is a a well-utilized transit route today, and that design criterion must be met in the new feature that we're installing.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember Riddle.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy. Thank you for the presentation and for the overlay of the early design and the current situation. Just kind of put it bluntly, I don't like where this is going. I just, there's so many things about it that just, you know, the increased cost, now we're adding another wall, and like we love walls, not. It seems to have shifted to deprioritize 104, which is the majority of the traffic that will be using it. It seems like it's in a situation where it's going to be impeding flow on 104 because it's the south and the east bit. You know, you got to go the farthest, and the new design just makes that even harder. And I hear what you're saying about the diagrams, but when I look at the overlay, it looks like there's room to the southwest. And so I have a similar question. Why did the engineers not utilize the flat area to the southwest? Right? If I get that right, southwest. Yes. So many questions that I know you can't answer right now, but I don't feel like this particular design is responding to the needs that have been described by our community for this. I mean, it's just doesn't seem to work for me. So I'm not sure if I want to continue with this contract with these folks, because I don't like where they're going. I don't feel like they're producing something that the city really will appreciate when it gets built. So I'd like to spend more time trying to push back and be, why is there a flat spot? You know, why is everything shifted to completely deprioritize the 104 route, which is our buses? It's all the cars. I mean, I'm confused and flummoxed, and I don't like giving money to people who confuse and flummox me, to be honest. So that's my thoughts.
Councilmember Bodie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Riddle kind of said it for me, but more eloquently than I was thinking. I'm not comfortable moving ahead with this design for a number of reasons, and in particular, I absolutely do want to know the answer to the question of why we would have to have a retaining wall and why the location couldn't be on the flatter part of the landscape. So I am not comfortable with the project going ahead with such a large retaining wall, even if it's well designed and looks nice, because that is not what I thought this roundabout was going to be for our future. So I think part of what is hard, and we're not like faulting the engineering work per se, we're saying there was one view of this that we had as council members and as a community. And as we move to the more detailed design, it doesn't seem to still stay within that concept. So I'm not sure what the next step should be. I am interested in hearing from my colleagues also, but I share Council Member Riddle's concerns that this has kind of morphed in a number of ways that seems different from our original concept of it. So I thank you again. I don't think that it's a matter of anything wrong occurring. I just think as we move to more detailed engineering, there are some disconnects to me. Thank you.
Councilmember Fairtommy, then Councilmember Goldman.
Hi, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Project Manager Sylvia, for basically a great presentation. I will ding you for one thing, which is that you should always put a horizontal scale on your figures, right? I love the topo lines that you did have. And I want to echo my colleagues' comments about the fact that, you know, even on your topo model, it did show that there was a flat area just to the south of the intersection. The extra 21 feet, I understand that the geometry of the roundabout has to conform to state standards, but couldn't it have been further south rather than further north? And, you know, there's an assumption there that I'm not really sure I understand what that assumption is. Now, that said, The other concern I have is with the geometry of that roundabout, because it looks like you're going to have to grade away several feet, because that intersection seems to span about 5 feet of elevation gain. And so will that leave 184th and 40th in a canyon as it enters into the roundabout? Because it's already a dangerous intersection to try to cross. I can imagine the sightlines would be really bad if they were literally in like a divot or something like that. So I don't know if the engineer addressed those issues, but I'm not sure what visually it would look like entering from 40th or from 184th.
Okay, Councilmember Goldman.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. I did really appreciate the graphics. I'll echo my colleagues that I have the same question that they asked before I could, which is why is the roundabout why is it shifting to the north when it could conceivably shift to the south? Now, if we hear from the contractors and they say there are legitimate reasons why it must shift to the north, then we as a council will have to grapple with that and decide, is it still worth that to continue with the project? But before we get there, I think we as a council do need to hear the argument for why the roundabout has to move in that direction, as opposed to utilizing the relatively flatter space towards the south than the southwest.
Yes, Councilmember Lebo first, then Deputy Mayor French.
Thank you for the presentation. I want to, just because I'm coming into this a little late, at what phase of the drawings design are we? Is transportation services, did they deliver us to a 30 or a 60%?
So the deliverables in our contract are 30% and 90%. I've described us as being between 60 and 90 as an approximation of where we are. So they have delivered a 30% deliverable, and we're approaching 90. And the level of design development that I can see in the drawings that the consultants described to me. That description, by the way, came from them, not necessarily from me. But yeah, it is an approximation.
So I guess I'm just to follow up a little more. Is the design that you're showing us, did they produce a conceptual or a 10%, or they said, the first deliverable is 30%?
The latter.
So the first deliverable is a 30%, but at some point they must have done a quick overlay, because these things are relatively standard. They know what the size of a roundabout needs to be on a state highway to accommodate semis and so on. There's a certain dimension that, you can just look it up. But I guess my point is, what did the consultant think they were doing when you contracted for a fee of $516,000, which is now proposed to be $880,000, which is about a 70% increase? What did they represent to us at the time that you contracted for this? And at what point did they realize, at what point did they realize that the petite cartoon was not really a design? Because petite just merely made a pretty picture. That was not an engineered solution. That was just merely, here's what a concept is. It wasn't even 10% at that point. So transportation services must have realized at some point, and it sounds like they've gone beyond 30% and they're on their way to 60%. So that if we want to change, we've already expended the monies beyond the point at which you realized that there was a problem.
Okay, so let me see there. I want to take those items one by one. So what the consultant assumed as what was the basis of their original scope and fee. They have a scope description in their contract that describes the conceptual design from the study. I don't think it describes the cost estimate that was produced by city staff around that same time as a basis for their fee, but they should have had access to that information because that estimate was developed prior to the execution of that contract. So I believe it's, without, having the opportunity to say, collect data and really start to understand the specifics, this, specific geometry of the site and the design challenges and kind of how that would affect their level of effort. I think they were relying on those two very high level representations of what the project was. So this, the project reached 30% design right about the time that the project was handed over, from the previous project manager to me. So I've been working with them since that time to identify, to develop the design, and as we've gone along, there have been discoveries in terms of like permitting requirements that weren't included in the original design, that there was the stormwater management piece that I described last time as another, large source of the cost. Some of those assumptions were assumptions that I think could not have been, they had to assume something at the start of the project, and perhaps the assumption was a little too optimistic, but they needed to get this far into design to make that determination, and recognize that they weren't dealing with as straightforward a site as was assumed. Some of the assumptions, I think, hindsight's 20/20, but I like to think that they, should have been caught earlier, and that's frustrating, for sure. But it's recognizing the need for those services now versus then, unfortunately doesn't change the fact that they're the required elements of the project design. Now, as to so yeah, it's there have been several, I think, realizations made over. I mean, I'm not sure if any of those happened prior to my becoming the manager of the project, but we've been kind of cobbling them together over the course of the last several months. And I mean, actually, the consultant submitted their initial amendment request to me back in August. It took 2 months to negotiate to a point where I felt comfortable bringing what you see before you now. And yeah, and so it's been a couple of months since it was I'm sorry, well, not since it was first introduced, but since we've sort of gotten it into that presentable shape. Your question about, I'm sorry, I kind of have to ask you to clarify. You had asked about whether we had spent funds that that were reserved for stages of design that haven't occurred yet. Was I kind of?
It's more of you've gone beyond 30% and you're on your way to 60%, and the deliverable isn't 90%. But I guess part of my question is, when I've looked at this, admittedly, I'm not enamored by the whole thing. It's a lot of money for a design that, if I were the consultant, I'd be embarrassed to ask for a 70% increase on what is really a very standard element. I mean, all they have to do is take the topo drawing and overlay what is a standard roundabout, and it would tell them pretty quickly what kinds of things they need to consider. I mean, when I do surveys, for example, I always increase the amount of area that we survey because you just don't know exactly where things are going to go. And it's so expensive to come back. And here we are, we have to survey out another 10, 20 feet. I'm just not impressed with the design services that we're getting, that they would take a standard roundabout and ask for a 70% increase. I mean, the price has gone up, the design costs have gone up, the schedule is way behind schedule. It's a roundabout, but it's a cash sinkhole.
I will say, Councilmember Lebo, I share some of the frustration I think you feel. whenever a project changes, by this magnitude, sort of halfway through it, it's an uncomfortable place for a project manager to be. I'm sure you understand that. And one detail that I probably minimized when I first described it during the work session that I should probably underscore here is so the consultant's proposed fee when this contract was executed originally represented about a 24% share of what was then thought to be the construction cost. So we were, based on what we thought we had to build, however inadequate the assumptions that informed that estimate may have been, the estimated cost was down in the low $2 million range, and their fee was, around that 24% of that figure, which in my experience in this region is not highly unusual for large projects, for design to represent about that share of hard costs. Having reached this level of design that we're at now, and having updated the estimated cost of everything that we have to build, and recognized that the project will most likely cost, I think it's more than 50% more than that original cost estimate. I forget the number offhand, but it's in excess of $3.5 million. This proposed increase in the design fee, this $800,000 figure that this amendment would bring their contract value to, is about the same share of that higher construction cost. And it's not, I know that they didn't simply take out a calculator and say, oh, the construction cost is now, $3.5 million, multiplied by the same 24%. This is our, we'd like to, increase our fee to this number now. I mean, that 2 months that I described of negotiating with them, I mean, we talked through point by point all of the things that were assumed in that $500,000 number, which the city accepted as an appropriate cost for those services, that was missing from what we know we have to do. So I believe that the additional services that they proposed are not way out of proportion with the additional cost that they're seeking. It's definitely disappointing to, and it's an uncomfortable feeling, for me too, I assure you, to have a project be discovered to be 50% larger than you thought it was halfway through it. But that part of this, unfortunately, I can't do anything about. I can certainly have the consultant come and speak to the council at a follow-up presentation. I kind of get the sense that that's something that members would be interested in. I know there is an explanation, for example, for the grading issue that several members described, and sort of why the project has to shift in the direction it does versus kind of take advantage of flatter areas. I know there is a reason that they can defend. I'm just not prepared to elaborate on it for you tonight, unfortunately.
Yeah, let's go follow up.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you for the explanation. Did the consultant, when they proposed the original fee, did they propose to do the full scope of work for that fee?
Did they propose to do the full scope of work?
Yeah, so when you originally contracted with them, was that intended to give you a complete IFC set of documents?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. IFC is issued for construction. So to give you a complete set of documents that you could go out and bid and then build from. So they were representing that it was an all-in full scope. I would just offer that. take another 2 years, they'll come back for more money for what they find.
Councilmember Deputy Mayor French.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Andy. Just a couple of things. You know, my world is a lot different from yours, but you inherited a project and you didn't know what you didn't know when you started working on this project, and you're still discovering some things that, and we're learning some things here as we go along. And inheriting someone else's project is not an easy task to pick up. And you've had to do forensics on it, kind of, to try to figure out what was included in the original designs, in a bunch of other things. So I want to remind my colleagues of that. These are all salient questions and important things that people are asking. But again, Mr. Sylvia did inherit this project, and I want to make sure that we keep that in mind. Shifting gears a little bit, Andy, the question of moving the design in that direction of the north, sort of with additional height of retaining wall, aren't there a significant stand of trees to the southwest there on that corner? Was that part of the thinking? And again, if you don't know the answer, that's okay. I just wanted to put that out there because it seems like there was some, there are some very substantive trees right there just inside the curve there.
There's a row of mature trees in that southwest quadrant that I think is denser than in other corners of the site.
Okay.
But there are, I don't want to, sort of minimize the impact to, what's happening in the northwest quadrant either. I mean, there are, like a lot of sites in Lake Forest Park, there are mature trees abutting all corners of developed areas. And, that's the case here too. Everything that we have to disturb, has an impact in that respect. And so, yeah, there are tree impacts happening in the northwest and southwest quadrants as well, probably less significant. I don't want to speak for the consultant. I don't.
That's all right.
Yeah, I will say I'd be surprised if that impact, whether just because of the unsavory nature of it or whether it could be permitted, if that was the primary consideration that shifted the roundabout to the north and west. I think it was more the geometric criteria that WashDOT has for these features on a state route sort of drove where, how this had to be laid out the way that's shown now.
Thank you. And I would just suggest as we go forward, depending on what you and the administration choose to do in terms of bringing the consultants in or whatever else to answer some questions, it would be helpful for us, I think, to have a clean copy, so to speak, of the new design. And as well as if we do have a subsequent follow-up here with the consultant, for example, or with you in short order here, to be able to do some layering of this particular diagram, starting with the base, the original design, and adding on a couple of layers so that it's easier for us lay people to understand the visuals. Colleagues, would you agree that would be helpful for? Okay, so I was just thinking about that from the standpoint I'm learning from my professorial friends down the way here about learning how to better understand things in a different way and to teach it as well. So. But thank you, Mr. Sylvia. I appreciate your thoughts.
Councilmember Cassover, then Councilmember Tony.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And Andy, I feel like we've taken up a lot of your time and asked you a lot of questions that are not necessarily yours to answer. And so I really appreciate your suggestion that, in fact, the consultant come back and answer them. And I think one of the things that we as a council need to do, and maybe we can take a little time ourselves in a cow or something, is to get clear in our minds what our goals are as a council for improvement on 104, what we were looking for with this roundabout. Because as I tried to get across in my comments, it doesn't feel like that this design is giving us what we wanted, for our community. So, and I think I'm hearing my colleagues kind of express some similar ideas here. So I think it would be beneficial if the consultant was clear that that's where we are as a council, so that they would be able to come and articulate to us how they believe their design does meet the goals that we had to serve our community. So I just put that out there. It's not engineering, it's not anything. It's like, that's what we do as policymakers. We need to figure out what we should do for our community that serves everybody and improves things. And so far, I think you've got a council here that's looking at this going, this isn't an improvement. So we need to figure that out with the consultant and understand what criteria they're putting on this project that may not serve our community.
Councilmember Furtani.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Mr. Sylvia, thanks for your patience. I know that you wanted the council to move on this tonight. If we don't move on it tonight and we bring in the consultant or whoever to talk to us later, how far behind do we fall on our time schedule for this project?
Well, it's 2 weeks to the next meeting, right? So, I mean, that's the, you know, there is work ongoing right now, even as the fate of this amendment is pending. So it's not as though all work stops tonight until we can talk about this again. So I don't want to suggest that it's a, you know, a one-to-one loss in schedule, you know, 2 weeks, say, to if, and that's even assuming that we can have a discussion at the next meeting that that addresses your concerns appropriately. So I would say that, you know, the impact is a couple of weeks on the high side. Hope I'm not missing anything about the importance of this 2 week stretch. I don't, you know, nothing's been shared with me previously about it's mostly just you know, every day counts kind of you know, driver that I'm responding to keep it moving. So can I, by the way, I just want to come back to the request from Deputy Mayor French for a sort of cleaned up version or illustration of the design. Can you, I'd like to convey that request to the consultant so that, you know, we can share something that you're seeking next go round, but I'm not sure. Can you kind of expand a little bit on what that would look like?
Sure, absolutely. And I'll obviously leave this up to your expertise, Andy. I think that what I was thinking is one, a clean diagram that is basically the sort of the final that would be, not final that would be built, but so it's easier for us if we were going to walk with it out and stand on the corner there at 40th and 104. And so we can kind of look at it that way. And then when I was talking about layering, maybe starting with the original diagram that was proposed in 2018, some odd years ago, and just put a couple of these different, add the next layer onto it, culminating with, I'm talking about this graphically in a presentation as opposed to, and just a paper diagram for us or a PDF of just the new dimensions, et cetera, without the underlying kind of noise. I'm not describing it well.
If I may interpret?
Please.
So obviously there's, you know, the township maps that have just the boundary edges and that have the scale and the dimensions and the radii of all the right of way. If we could start with something like that and then have layered on top of that, maybe a satellite image. And then if we could have maybe that township map layered on with the original design and that township map layered on with the new one. Ideally, I would love it. I know you can do this in Bluebeam. You can actually put layers so we can click them on and off. We don't have that program here, so I don't know what we can do in lieu of that. At the very least, if we can have these different iteratives so we can see one common element between each image, you know, and so that we have a common point that we can reference between a satellite image of the current Google map, original concept that came through, current concept, just so we have a sense of those different stages and how they relate to each other. Did that
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Again, completely deferring to you, Mr. Sylvia, on this about the best way to present it. I think that most of the policymakers up here are pretty good at visualizing things, but I do find that from my own standpoint, uncluttering some things and being able to look at it sort of multidimensionally, literally, through layering either through software or just peeling a layer off to be able to look at it uncluttered so I can unfocus my eyes and sort of see the bigger picture.
Yeah. I think we want to trust the scale and the alignment between each. That's the critical.
Okay, well, we know where we're not going tonight. So Andy, we're not going to move forward on this. I'm going to suggest we get off our asses and we all walk up to that intersection and stand some time and see what's really going on. This is ridiculous. I don't need a satellite picture to see something where I drive through every day. There's probably a reason. I'm pretty sure the reason it's not going that way because you're going to have roads that are straight shots. A roundabout, if you don't know, it's 4 intersections and they have to go roundabout. They don't go straight through. I'm sorry, I'm a little frustrated, but this is ridiculous. The intersection's right there, folks. I will rent the 10-passenger van. We'll go. Can you get the guy who's designing all this out there? Are there any stakes in the ground out there yet, Andy? They got things marked?
They did. Well, they have, I mean, the only thing that we staked recently was the location of the proposed utility poles, because we know we have to move a bunch of those. So we don't have things like proposed curb lines and, you know, like where the new center island would go, for instance, staked. We could, I'm sure, develop a drawing that could be used in the field that is dimensioned, that has known, you could refer to the drawing in the field and say, okay, I know I'm standing here and we have a dimension. It's going to be 20 feet from here to the center island. If you want to know where that's going to be, for example, that could, you know, give you, you know,
We just need to figure out a way to go look and so people understand what's going on. Reason I'm kind of into this right now is I actually went and walked with people last Saturday where the project on 520, wherever 522, where everybody's upset. If you go look at it and you see what's really going on, you have a lot better idea than all those damn pictures we're looking at. I'm tired of drawings. Go up and look and see what's really happened to the people. See the trees that are coming down. Then you know what you're talking about. So Andy, just do whatever you have to do. I understand we're at this. I would like to go up there and see why it's this way. There's a reason they did this way, have them explain. And we're gonna have to figure out either we hire the dumbest and most dishonest people on earth, or we don't know how to hire people, because it sounds to me that we don't hire anybody with a brain. And that's kind of the feeling I'm getting, John. I think you think that everybody that the city ever hires is just stupid. And I can't imagine that these people are big business and they haven't ever done a project. So I need to know what's going on, where we went wrong. So I'm going to ask you for your help, and we're going to have to figure this out. So Andy, see if you can get them out here. We'll meet them up there. We'll go see what's going on, because we've got to move forward in the city somewhere. So let's just start figuring out how to do it. Everybody's got to do their part. Thank you, Andy, very much. Say hi to the kid and the dog and the wife and the cat and the bird and whatever else. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
I'll just offer that I'm a builder. I like to build, and I like roundabouts because they create a safer roadway, particularly where there are a number of intersections that come together that have certain challenges, whether they be line of sight or different kinds of traffic or speeds. I like roundabouts. This roundabout, though, the primary pathway will be a sharp dog leg around this roundabout, whereas oftentimes you will generally see the primary path be more of a direct route. I would just offer that there's so many good reasons for a roundabout. They are safer for cars. They're safer for pedestrians. They slow traffic, which reduces sound. So there are lots of advantages to them. I just offer that because of the way that you have to go about getting around this roundabout for the primary mode of traffic, that there may be a reaction from our citizens that say the best solution is to remove the roundabout and just pave right over it and put it back to what it was.
Well, that could be, but I totally agree with you. Everywhere I go now, there's roundabouts in every place. and big roundabouts, and they're all that thing. And I agree with it. They do usually go like they're straight across and you go around. This is a hard intersection. That's maybe why we're having the difficulties we're having. But I would like your input, John, because you know more about this than pretty much anybody else up here does. And I would just like to see how we can move stuff forward and get the right thing for the citizens. I'm tired of walls too. If we have to build some kind of a wall, I'm sorry, there's walls all over the world, but we'll see what happens with that. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, and as a designer, builder, there are other options like ovals and other atypical stuff. The easiest thing to do is a circle because it's prescriptive and it's there and it's in the code. We deviate from that. There's some challenges, proof of concept. We end up having to provide more proof, but that may be a benefit to our community. And I don't, without having this conversation with the actual engineering team, I don't know if they've explored any of that. So I think we just need to get more integrated with the team, understand what they've done, what they haven't done, and then move forward from there.
Jeff, I think Andy's probably gone, but I think that's a great idea. I really want to, because I'm pretty sure they have answers to a lot of these questions. So we want to get the answers. So Andy, I told you to go. Get off my damn screen and go to bed. Okay, so we'll work on that. We'll work on that council so we can maybe get some better understanding, because even if we don't move forward or whatever, we're gonna have to figure out how we can do what we're gonna do and whatever in the future. So Andy, again, good night. I am the mayor. Thank you. Okay, council, with that, I should probably eat one of these Snickers, but in the meantime, we're gonna go on council discussion and action. City council commissions, board liaisons, appointments, the 2023 appointments. I guess we have Matt and Tom. Matt, you're in charge of this?
I'm gonna pass it off to Deputy Mayor French, but I'm just gonna bring up
Okay.
the list.
I was going to enjoy you leading this, Matt. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And you have a list before you. I believe the only change is for the RIA 8 and Councilmember Bodie and Councilmember Furtani have agreed to change the primary and backup roles. Do I have that correct, Councilmember Bodie?
That's correct. We're just going to flip them. So Councilmember Foratani will be our representative and I'll be our alternate.
I concur. I concur.
Okay.
And Deputy Mayor,
yeah.
If I may, never mind, I found it.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure that, again, this is not necessarily set in stone, but it's nice to have it pretty close because it goes out so people can see in the broader community what's going on. Okay, yeah. Vice Chair Casper.
Yes, I'm on the PSRC Growth Management Policy Board. I'm actually a member, no longer an alternate for this year.
Very top.
It's the top of the page, the second page.
Oh, yeah, PSRC. Matt, would you? Thank you.
And also on the Seashore, I'm the co-chair.
Excellent.
And if Matt's making edits.
Yep.
For Department of Natural Resources, Washington Community Forestry Council.
Just a second. It's almost
Yep, I'm waiting for him. Right there, Forestry Council.
Wait,
Yep, you're on the right line. Community Forestry Council.
Forestry, not
I know, it's subtle, but might as well get it right while he's editing.
Sorry, Matt. And then going back up to Councilmember Cassover's co-chair, you need to remove member. There you go.
Also, one of the new additions is Racer. And so on this list, and I'm happy to serve, I would be the liaison to Racer for the Principals Assembly.
Looks like we got you right at the bottom.
Yeah, I just wanted to make everyone aware that this is a new addition to the list.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you bet. Colleagues, any other, aside from Scrivener's edits down the line, I think we're good. Does anybody want to make a motion to adopt?
So moved.
Second.
And moved and second. Mr. Murray, you want to carry from there?
Been moved in second to approve all the appointments. Any other discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, pass unanimously. Thank you, council.
Thanks, everybody.
Do you have any other business, Tom?
Nope.
Okay. Does anybody have any other business? Great. How about council committee reports? Have we had any council committees? Okay, yes. Council member reports, is this, yeah, probably a council member report.
Right, yeah. I'd like to report on the Climate Action Committee. Is that appropriate?
Okay, yes.
Okay, great. So the Climate Action Committee had its first meeting of the year, and at some point they'll come and give us a report to the council. But just so you know, the community survey that they sent out got 450 responses, which is pretty amazing. And from that, we're culling something like 35, 36 volunteers. So we're looking forward to a very productive year of doing outreach with the community and talking about the climate. Thanks.
Thanks, Tracy. Deputy Mayor French.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I attended several meetings. I attended the Deputy Mayor and Council President's meeting earlier today. I had a very robust discussion that we had bookmarked about how to interface effectively with Sound Transit as well as WashDOT. And I have some takeaways from that I will share with the administration. I shared a couple of them with Vice Chair Cassover earlier today. And then I attended the Sound Cities Association Public Issues Committee last night. We have a number of new members. This is when they're seated at the first meeting of the year. You may know that we have a new executive director, David Hoffman, and he's doing an outstanding job. They have a lot of new staff members, so they're a few growing pains there, but it's going along very well. And I wanted to mention quickly that one of the themes last night at the orientation for the new members was the theme of congeniality and agreeing to disagree and various permutations of those things. And there was a huge emphasis of saying, at least a half dozen people said yesterday, welcome to the PIC, here's some suggestions. Please keep in mind that when the body has made a decision, it is the will of the body. It's time to put it behind you and move on. And I thought the discussion was very, very appropriate given sort of the political rancor that we're seeing out there in the world right now. And I wanted to give a shout out to my colleagues on the PIC for their consideration and kindness that they give to their members and guests in that group. So there wasn't anything really substantive last night besides some comments on the regional homelessness 5-year plan. And we've all seen a variety of the information about that from Alexis Mercedes Rink prior to the holiday break. And things are moving ahead of pace relative to the homelessness association, the 5-year plan. And I think the consensus continues to be amongst the policymakers in the PIC that the sort of one size fits all does not apply here. There was a mention too that there was a great deal of skepticism of anything involving spearheaded by the county or by the city of Seattle regarding homelessness. And it was not meant to be punitive or to be derogatory, but more to be, they haven't been successful. So they're hopeful that this authority will be successful where they have not been. I did also want to say, just from a standpoint of this body as it relates to this SCA PIC, the Sound Cities Association is going to try to get the action items in our hands well in advance so that I can bring them to you, at least on a preliminary basis, for your opinions before we have to take a vote on them, because there's been concern that a number of members have had to abstain because they haven't, they received the information right, they didn't have a council meeting before the meeting. So I'm hoping that that's going to occur, and so that it's my commitment to you all to make sure that you have that in your hands if there's an action to be taken. There were no actions taken at last night's meeting. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember, thank you, Councilmember. Deputy Mayor. Councilmember Bodie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. I wanted to share the results from the Planning Commission meeting, which was on Tuesday of this week. They continue to review the current comprehensive plan with our planning director, Bennett, and covered a lot of what's in the comprehensive plan right now on transportation. They also reviewed the potential scope of work that would go out for a consultant and made comments for tightening up some of the provisions. I actually thought they were very thoughtful comments, and they approved their work plan for their recommended work plan that they'll submit to us for 2023 and their annual report for 2022. They're looking forward to being part of the presentation, or at least having, you know, the chair or a representative be part of the presentation on their reasonable use exemption recommendations and their sign ordinance recommendations, which, as I understand it, might come before the council in February. So very substantive meeting. Oh, one more thing. In terms of a timeline, what Director Bennett suggested was that the Planning Commission try to get its work done and get its recommendations done in roughly a year, and then make sure that the council has sufficient time to for public engagement, additional public engagement, and considering their recommendations thoroughly. So just a brief update on that, more to come, I'm sure.
Councilmember Cassover.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Couple of meetings since we were last together. The first was the Growth Management Policy Board, on which I'm now a full member. The first presentation was an overview of Governor Inslee's budget and the legislation that we already know will be before the House and Senate here this year. There's going to be a big focus on housing and homelessness. And we did have some discussion of the Middle Housing Bill, House Bill 1110. And I would recommend that council pay close attention to these housing issues that are going to be important to our community and all around us. The other presentation that we had was from the Puget Sound Recovery Board. And this was very interesting to me. They the first slide in the presentation was a list of strategies and tactics that they are utilizing or are recommending and, you know, supporting for Puget Sound recovery. And of course, what Puget Sound recovery is about is salmon, shellfish, and whale, and making sure that the ecosystem is supporting those three key species. So the first item on that slide was what they call smart growth, and that's growth that protects ecosystems. And of course, that's just right in line with everything that we believe here in Lake Forest Park. The second item was floodplains and estuaries. And while we don't actually consider ourselves on the edge of either of those things, we are on a lakeshore, which really is, you know, pretty much the same thing. And managing and protecting those intersections with bodies of water is, of course, critical to the health of Puget Sound. The third item was the fact that wastewater systems in the state of Washington are in dire need of improvement. The fourth item was stormwater runoff. And again, this is something that we here in Lake Forest Park are paying a great deal of attention to and are taking as much responsibility as we can to make sure that our community is not adding to the problems of stormwater runoff. And the last, of course, was fish passage barriers. And we are an exemplary community when it comes to dealing with those. So I was very interested in this presentation because it seems like Lake Forest Park is just right in line with it. And one of the things that we are one of the things that we have to deal with now is this whole concept of smart growth, particularly in the face of the housing bills that are coming down the pike here from the legislature. The other item that I really paid attention to as I looked at some maps is the fact that very few communities in our whole state have what we have, which is a major transit corridor right on a shoreline. Really, it's just Kenmore and Lake Forest Park and downtown Seattle. There just really aren't any other communities in the state that have that same issue. And some of these middle housing bills are going to require the most density along transit corridors. And this is where I think we as a community are going to have to really stand up for ourselves and make that point, that if the state is committed to the recovery of Puget Sound, that communities like ours cannot also be expected to bear the same kind of density along the transit corridor that other communities might. So I actually made a statement about that in the meeting, and I think I was heard, and I'll continue to do that in these meetings going forward. When I did talk about the conflict that we have between the kind of development that some of the state legislation that's going to be before the legislature this year has with this concept of smart growth and protecting the ecosystems along shorelines, I was recommended to me that we pay attention to something called the Ecosystem Coordination Board, which is also part of PSRC. And this is a group that's addressing smart growth and the tension between housing density requirements and Puget Sound recovery. So anyway, I've started to dig into that a little bit, and I'll let you know what's going on. The other meeting was Seashore, which I'm again elected co-chair to this year, along with Councilmember Pobey from Shoreline. And we had a very interesting presentation on from the State Department of Transportation on their work on ultra high-speed rail, which is a collaborative effort between British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon, and is looking at how to develop ultra high-speed rail, which would be rail that travels up to 250 miles an hour between Vancouver, BC, and Portland. The Washington legislature has given this group initial funding and a set aside for a federal match. And there is great hopes that with the infrastructure bill that was passed by the feds last year, that there may be some matching money coming for that. So that's way out in the future. I'm not going to benefit from this, but maybe my grandchildren. But it was exciting to hear about, because I've had the great good fortune to travel on high-speed rail, as I'm sure my colleague, Councilmember Furitani, has, both in Japan and in Europe. And I'm telling you, it makes a huge difference, and it cuts out all those short airplane rides that we tend to take here in the United States, which are very harmful to the environment. So if this ever actually happens, it'll be a great thing. But I'll keep you apprised of any new developments there. The other thing that we did was to discuss what topics we wanted to hear at Seashore during the rest of this year. And I asked for one thing, and I think that we will get that, which is to hear from the county demographer and others who are following demographics and trends, particularly in work, working from home, return to offices, all of those things to do with commute patterns, because it's very difficult for us to really think about how we plan transit if we don't really understand what the trends are. I don't know that anybody fully understands what the trends are yet, but we must pay as much attention as we can to the data that we do have and make sure that the data is getting collected that we really need. So I'll keep you apprised of that as it comes along. The other thing that I asked for was whatever the best thinking is these days on how we integrate e-bikes into our traffic systems. I don't know about the rest of you, but I've had a couple of rather unpleasant experiences when walking on the trails when e-bikes come along. They're much faster, they're much heavier. And we need to really understand as policymakers how to encourage their use, because I believe in them, but also to do it in a way that's safe for pedestrians and other cyclists. So anyway, we'll see what comes of that. But there were a lot of other topics discussed, all the general things, what's happening with the bus systems and the train systems, and how all of that's coming along. And also a presentation from Seattle and Shoreline about what they're doing with the State Highway 99, the Aurora corridor, because there's a lot of work going on there, and it affects a lot of businesses, a lot of us, So anyway, I'll keep you posted. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I think Councilmember Riddle was first, and Councilmember Goldman.
Thank you. I attended 2 meetings this afternoon, had a pop between the 2 of them, the North King County Coalition on Homelessness. And just to follow up, Deputy Mayor French, the King County Regional Homeless Authority Implementation Board will be reviewing the 5-year plan at their next meeting. And that is going to be this January 25th. It's virtual, hybrid, definitely virtual. They will be taking public comment. You can do written comment ahead of time, you can do public comment during, as I understand. They will then be making a recommendation to the governing board. I believe the intention is for them to make that vote for a recommendation on that January 25th meeting. The governing committee has a meeting scheduled for February 16th. There's a thought that they might have one before then so that they can get a review in front of the governing committee of the 5-year plan with public comment. And they may be voting for it on February 16th, again, after hearing public comment. So for those of us that are interested in engaging with that process individually or as a city, those are the dates that I've been told, so the 2 February dates are still a bit fuzzy. So we want to keep track of those. But I do know that the January 25th date appears to be fixed with the implementation board. So that'll be our first opportunity to provide sort of a nice true public comment into the system on that. And then for Healthier Here, nothing necessarily specific to our area in general, though. The Connect to Community system that they have been working on for 3.5 years to allow providers to synchronize care across systems, behavioral health, to managed care, just a way to connect all of those folks together. It's not a medical record communication. It's really, I'm going to make a referral to a behavioral health therapist, and it gives you the ability to see that they've gone to the meeting, that they've actually made and connected with that referral. So people aren't being lost in the system. And that'll be going, it's kind of been working, be going live here soon. It's really the first of its kind in the country. A lot of interest, positive interest from the different healthcare groups and healthcare folks that they're really interested in this. And it's going to grow, and it is something that these Medicaid waiver funds has been able to be used to be implemented. And I think it's going to improve care for not just the targeted folks that we've been asked to deal to improve, but obviously everybody. So that affects the entire region and is likely to go beyond King County because of its initial successes. So just kind of a positive thing out of that. Lives will be improved. People will have follow-ups that they're supposed to be doing, and they'll actually know that they're doing it. So there you go.
Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, I attended the tree board meeting last week. They are nearly finished with their work plan for the year. They'll be approving that on February 1st, and then they're interested in coming to council to present it, what they'll be working on at some time in February. They're very eager to get to the tree inventory data. It'll be a combination of making recommendations, but also a lot of what they'll be doing is helping to educate the community on the value of trees and taking care of trees and areas where we could plant more trees, that sort of thing. And then the other, more of just a good of the order, King County Metro has put out their next draft of their proposed Linwood Link connections, how they'll be changing their bus routes when Link opens up, I believe late next year to Shoreline and Linwood. I'd encourage you to look over those. Metro will be having 3 online open houses. I'm planning to attend one. I would encourage others on the council and in the community to attend just to see what's going to be changing next year. This will be done collaboratively along with Sound Transit making their own changes to the Route 522 bus.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I forgot one thing, if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Mayor. I just want to let everybody know that the North Urban Human Services Alliance is having their annual award ceremony next week on, where is it? Thursday, January 19th. and that our own city administrator and along with the city managers of Bothell, Shoreline, Kenmore, and Kirkland are up for the Building Bridges Award. In fact, I think they're getting awarded the Building Bridges Award for their work in putting together our Regional Crisis Response Agency, RACER. So if any of you can attend that, that would be great. I will not be able to attend that, and I don't know that I've told everybody, but I am having some surgery on the 23rd, and so I'm wearing a mask. I'm trying not to catch anything before then. And so I will not be attending that in person. I just think it's too close to my surgery date to risk it. So if anybody else can attend it in person, that would be wonderful. Let me know if you need any details. It's at the Ronald Methodist Church over in Shoreline on Highway 99.
Okay. Yes, Councilmember Fortani.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just one thing that I thought of too, it's been brought to my attention that there's a House Bill 1078 that's been sponsored by our two representatives that is about urban tree ordinances and modifications to such. And so it might be of some interest to basically the staff and the tree board. Thanks.
Okay. What else? Okay, not seeing any. Couple of things. One, talk to all your friends. I'm interviewing for the tree board this month. I have some planning commission people. I just had a retirement on the library board. So talk to your friends. We need to get people out and doing it. If you guys know people, just have, I even had a lady call me at home, which I was pretty shocked, but, and I just tell them, main thing is just go ahead and, go to a meeting. So you make sure you want to do it. But I really hope this year that we start getting people back in person. I know Lori's, Councilmember Bodie's pretty excited about, we got to move some stuff forward. Let's get through this COVID, start meeting with each other. Couple other things, it kills me on that Puget Sound and the save everything. We do everything, but how come it's so hard for us to get money? It's one of those things that we do. We are the checklist. We are the city that is the city that's doing everything that they want, and I just need the money to do it. So that one makes me scratch my head. I know, thank you. You guys do. Number 3, go out and look around. I did go out on Saturday and spent some time with some people on 520 and 522, and the world's a whole lot different when you're standing on the ground. Go look, and what we need here is, let's be honest, Sound Transit's not going to stop this program. So we're into a mode, and we've actually been on a mode, and I'll tell you that Jeff and Phil have been working with people for quite a while. And we're actually doing well. We are communicating, but we don't know everything. And I learned a lot just by going out. And what you need to do is, all of you, if you have a chance, go walk around, see, because they say 440 trees. I don't know what 440 trees are. I need to know what trees they're talking about and why they're going down. And are they going down to actually do something with the property, or are they doing some trees going down to stage it? But we have no idea, and we have no idea what it looks like. So I've told everybody, if you have stakes in your yard, and I want to come by and look, because that way that we can relay it to Phil and Jeff, and they can ask the people and say, why are we doing this? Because the only option we have now is to help make this project the best we can and work with Sound Transit to do a good job for the citizens. And we will do that. It's going to take a while, but we are doing a good job of communicating. So let's all work and help the citizens by getting out there and taking a look, because I think that's the best way to do stuff. And on with that, thank you very much, Phil. And I think that award's fantastic. And I'm glad to know the date of your surgery so we can have our party at your house. So that works out good. Thanks to the chief and everybody, guys, here we go. We got a lot going on this year. It never stops. So let's all see what we can do, and we'll work together, but let's get these commissions filled. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to our wonderful city administrator for his half hour, and we'll go from there.
I promise it won't be a half an hour, but this goes to what Councilmember Fioritani brought up, House Bill 1078. So I've got an Excel spreadsheet where I'm tracking the bills of interest to the city of Lake Forest Park. 1078 is one of them. It would significantly change our tree ordinance, allowing banking of trees for further clearing of properties. There's some talk about carbon offsets in there that give me pause, not yet understanding what they mean by that. But we also have House Bill 1026, which would strip our ability to have design review board here at the town center. Been talking to Shelley about, does that also mean our hearing examiner? It details these boards as volunteer and that cities can't have them as an impediment to housing, affordable housing, et cetera. And so our question has been, could we, as we have in other zones, utilize our hearing examiner? We're kind of on our own on this one. Even EWC is backing this one, as many of our neighboring cities. And then we have two middle housing, House Bill 1110 and 1167, and there's details in here that'll be included. And for you to take a look, quick synopsis, and then you can read the bill as well. I have some questions about if some of these regulations even meet building and fire code, and how we came up with some of these great ideas. But on the positive side, so far the Senate's good to us. Senate Bill 5001, Public Facilities District. This is beneficial to us as, you know, we're pursuing some regional aquatic facilities at the north end. House Senate Bill 5120, which is the crisis center licensing, you know, as connections and others move into the area, there needs to be a licensing process through the Department of Health. And then the last one right now that we have is Senate Bill 5144, a battery stewardship program that would be spooled up over the next several years. And I think, you know, here at City Hall, we take light bulbs, batteries, old electronics equipment. So those are the big ones. I understand that any day now one is going to drop that would require cities that have, such as BRT, to allow TOD. This would be a state level mandate. So something like that at the town center. So Shelley warned me that that one's coming. So we'll be watching it and getting that one out to you as well. So I think that's more than enough on the list. What's going on for tonight.
I was having a good evening.
So just because I'm me, it's pretty amazing, folks. For 60 years, we've done everything in our power to make this city what it is. All the trees, all the way we've tried to protect the creeks and everything. And for some reason, in a state that we all agree that is what we're all trying to do, we have things going on right now, which is going to take our ability to take care of ourselves and protect our own properties and protect our trees. For me, that's not right. So just make sure you get heard. We do not, our tree ordinance was made by us, for us, and that's what we do. We don't need them changed. And I agree with Phil. I don't know what a carbon, whatever is.
Offset.
Yeah, you know, so we stick up for ourselves. If you talk to anybody, stick up for the rights that we have and for all the work our citizens and people have done to make the city a great city we like to live in. And hopefully we can get some wins out of this. So until then, guys, have a great week. Have a good time. Good luck, Philippa.
Thank you.
And take care of yourselves. Thank you, guys. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.
Night, Lori.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Lori.
Yep.
Hawaii, Guam, you know.